Two recruits leaned against the fence line, boots hooked on the lowest rail, watching the man in the utility jacket the way you'd watch a stray dog wander onto a runway. "Grandpa's lost," one of them said. "Somebody tell him the VFW's 2 exits back." "He's got a rucksack," the other said. "Old one. Look at the strap." "The old man in the utility jacket won't let anyone touch the strap on his rucksack, and he won't say why," said the first, and neither of them meant it as anything but a joke, because Blake Vandergrift was already moving toward the gate with his run sheet clipped to its foam board, already lifting one hand like a man waving off a delivery truck idling in a fire lane. 6 days. That was the number sitting over the whole range like weather, though nobody had written it on a wall. 6 days until the regional contract renewal vote, the one that would decide whether Cutback Ridge kept its reserve component funding or lost it to a base 2 counties over with newer gates and a cleaner injury record. The cutoff for today's timed run was 11 minutes 40 seconds, a number Blake had recalibrated himself that morning, shaving 9 seconds off the old standard because, in his words, the old standard had been written for men who didn't have his data. Somewhere behind the recruits, a wager was already assembling itself out of loose bills and looser confidence. $20 against Ezra Tillman even reaching the low crawl, 40 against him finishing it all. If you have ever been the slowest one on the team and someone slowed down just to stay beside you, you already know how this ends. Blake reached the gate before Ezra did, run sheet against his hip like a shield. "Sir, this is a closed course. Insured personnel only, active roster only." He said it pleasantly enough, the way a man says something he expects to be his last word on a subject. Ezra didn't stop walking so much as arrive at a stop, the way a truck settles rather than brakes. He was 74, though nothing about the set of his shoulders volunteered the number, and he wore a faded olive utility jacket decades out of any regulation cut, pressed all the same, the crease still holding along the sleeve like it remembered being ironed by someone who cared whether it did. "I'm aware," Ezra said. That was the whole of it. No explanation, no ID produced, no plea. Behind him, the recruits at the fence traded a look that said the joke had just gotten a little less funny, and neither of them could say why. Blake glanced down at his sheet, back up, the particular impatience of a man who has already scheduled the rest of his morning and resents anything that threatens the schedule. "You understand there's a cutoff, 11:40. Full course, all 18 obstacles, ends at the flag by the timing shed." "I understand there's a cutoff," Ezra said, and something in the flatness of the repetition made one recruit near the fence stop chewing his gum. 40 yards off, near the equipment racks, a younger recruit, smaller than the rest, breathing with the deliberate care of a man rationing air he didn't fully trust, watched the exchange without laughing at all. He'd have been easy to overlook in that crowd, and mostly was. His name, though nobody at the gate said it yet, was Logan Hackney, and he was the only person on that field who had already decided the old man in the jacket was not lost. Ezra set the rucksack down at his feet, not dropped, not slung. Set down, the way you'd set down something that had a right to rest exactly there and nowhere else, and the strap, resewn so many times its stitching had become its own kind of ledger, caught the morning light and held it. Ezra's gear check had an order to it, and the order never changed, which was the first thing about him that read as strange to anyone paying attention and as simply correct to Ezra himself. He knelt, one knee first, always the same knee, weight settling forward before it settled down, and checked the rucksack's shoulder straps, both of them, thumb running the seam from buckle to base, as if reading a line of braille only he had been taught. Then the boots, laces re-cinched from the toe upward, never the reverse. Then, last, always last, he touched 2 fingers to the old strap stitching, not tightening it, not adjusting it, just touching it, the way another man might touch a coin in his pocket before deciding whether today called for luck or didn't. Nobody asked him what the stitching meant. A few of the recruits had noticed it days back when he'd first started showing up along the fence line to watch the morning runs. Noticed the rows of small, tight stitches running the strap's length. Too many rows for one repair, too deliberate for wear and tear, more like a record kept in thread than a mend. One recruit had asked him once, half joking, if he sewed his own gear because the Marine Corps couldn't afford tailors anymore. Ezra had said something like that, and left it there, and the boy had not asked again, because there are answers that close a door as gently as they open one. Logan Hackney was the only recruit who didn't drift off when Ezra knelt to run his checks. He stood a respectful 10 feet back, inhaler a visible weight in his cargo pocket, and watched the way you watch someone doing something correctly without yet knowing what correct looks like. "You're the one who wheezes on the rope climb," Ezra said, without looking up. Logan's ears went red before his mouth caught up. "Yes, sir. Since I was a kid. Asthma." Cold-triggered or exertion-triggered? The question stopped Logan flat, because in 3 weeks of course instruction, nobody official had asked him that, only told him to keep up or fall out. "Both, sir. Worse on cold mornings." Ezra nodded once, filing it the way a man files something he intends to use later rather than something he's simply being polite about. "Breathe from your gut, not your chest. 4 counts in, 6 counts out, whether you're moving or not. Start now, not when you need it." Logan didn't laugh and didn't ask why an old man loitering outside a fence would bother teaching him anything. He just started counting, quietly, under his breath, 4 and 6, 4 and 6, like a boy trying on a coat 2 sizes too large and finding, to his own surprise, that it might fit him yet. 40 miles east, in a kitchen with the window cracked to let in the smell of turned soil, Geneva Tillman knelt in her garden row with a trowel in one hand and a folded church bulletin in the other, using its edge to mark a square on the wall calendar where Tuesdays didn't usually get marked. 50 years married to a man who counted breaths instead of minutes had taught her which days deserved a small pencil check and which didn't, and this was one of the small ones. Not a big day, not yet, just a day worth remembering later in case it turned out to matter. She patted the soil once, flat-palmed, the way she'd pat a door before walking through it, and went back inside to wait by the phone that she knew, from 50 years of practice, would not ring until he was ready for it to. Back at the fence, Blake Vandergrift was proving in the meantime exactly why the company had paid for his credential. He'd spent the last 20 minutes recalibrating the course's electronic timing gates by hand, moving obstacle 6's trigger plate 4 inches left after watching 2 runs clip its edge and throw a false split. He did the math out loud, for the recruits and for himself in equal measure, reciting the old average, the new average, the margin of error the old gate had been carrying for 11 months, without anyone catching it. 4 inches, he said, tapping the plate once with his boot. That's the difference between a course that measures you and a course that lies to you. Nobody laughed at that. 2 recruits who'd resented him an hour earlier were writing his numbers down. He turned from the gate with the satisfaction of a man who'd just proven something and found Ezra Tillman waiting at the fence with the patience of a man who hadn't needed proof of anything. "You're still here," Blake said. "I am." Blake consulted his run sheet, though he didn't need to. The figure had been sitting in his head since sunrise. Cutoff's 11:40. Every recruit who fails to clear the full 18 obstacles inside that window gets flagged non-passing, and every flag on this roster this week gets read into Friday's contract review. That's not me being difficult. That's the insurance carrier's own liability language. I didn't write it, I just enforce it. He said it the way he seemed to say most things, pitched slightly past Ezra, toward the recruits gathering loosely behind him, an audience he'd built without appearing to try. "I'm aware of insurance language," Ezra said. "Then you're aware that anyone injured on this course outside the enrolled roster voids the range's coverage for the day. Which means if you go over that fence, sir, and you go down, this whole company's liability exposure changes before lunch. I don't intend to go down." Blake almost smiled, the particular smile of a man who has heard confidence before and watched it fail on this exact ground. "The numbers don't lie. 1140 is calibrated for a healthy 19-year-old with 2 years of conditioning behind him. You're..." He paused, not unkindly, just precisely. "Not that." A ripple of laughter went through the recruits at the fence, low at first, the kind that needs someone else's laugh to greenlight it before it commits to being loud. Someone said $40 says he doesn't clear the wall. Someone else raised it to 60 and added the low crawl to the bet, on the theory that a man Ezra's age would find the mud alone humiliating enough to quit. "Tell you what," Blake said, warming to the size of his own crowd now. "You finish under cutoff, full course. I'll certify it myself, put my name on it, no argument. You don't, and you won't. You shake my hand at the gate and we call it a story for your grandkids." He held out his hand as if the deal were already struck, already a formality. Ezra looked at the hand, then past it, toward the first obstacle, the log wall with its raw new paint. "I don't need my hand shook," he said. "I need a start time." The recruits went quieter at that, not because the line was clever, but because it wasn't trying to be. And something about a man who wasn't trying to be clever in front of that many laughing boys was, itself, a kind of information nobody there yet knew how to read. Ezra's gear check ran its fixed order one more time. The same knee, the same seam check on both straps, the same 2 fingers laid briefly on the stitched section of the old strap, and Logan Hackney, watching from 10 feet back, had begun to understand that watching this ritual was less like watching a man stretch and more like watching a man read a passage he'd read 1,000 times before, checking it was still true. "You're not stretching," said the recruit nearest the fence, the one who'd started the $40 bet, grinning at his own audacity. "You warming up or auditioning for a nursing home commercial?" A few of them laughed. Not all. Logan didn't. Ezra said nothing to the boy at all. He finished the check, straightened, knee first, then hip, then the long, unhurried settling of a body that had learned decades ago there was no version of standing up too fast that ever paid for itself, and looked instead at Logan. "Cold-triggered, you said?" "Yes, sir." "How's your morning?" Logan blinked, surprised the question had survived the crowd's noise to reach him at all. "Cold, sir. Wheezing some already." "4 in, 6 out. Started already?" "Yes, sir, since you told me." Ezra nodded, filing that too, and said nothing further, and the boy who'd made the joke about the nursing home commercial found that his laugh had nowhere left to land, because the old man hadn't given it anywhere to go. The silence that followed wasn't dramatic. It was smaller than that, the kind of quiet that comes when a room stops finding something funny and hasn't yet decided what to find it instead. Blake filled it, because Blake generally did. "No stopwatch?" he asked, nodding at Ezra's bare wrist. "I've got a spare, company issue. On the house, since you're not enrolled." "Don't need one." "Everybody needs one. That's the whole point of a cutoff." "I know when I'm moving and I know when I'm not," Ezra said. "Never needed a number to tell me which." Blake let that sit a half-second, filed it as eccentricity rather than answer, and clicked his own stopwatch app awake on the phone in his jacket pocket, run sheet steadied on the foam board under his forearm. "Suit yourself. I'll keep the official time regardless. Every second of it's going in Friday's file." He raised his voice, half theater now, playing the moment for the recruits who drifted closer along the fence. "Gate opens on my mark. Full 18. Cut off 11:40. Go time." Ezra stepped to the start line without ceremony, without a last look at the crowd, without so much as adjusting the old strap one final time, because he had already adjusted everything he intended to adjust, twice, in the order that mattered to him. He set his feet the way a man sets feet who has stood on 10,000 start lines that looked nothing like this one and everything like it. The recruits' laughter had thinned to something closer to attention, the kind that isn't sure yet whether it's watching a joke or the beginning of something it will be telling people about for years. "Go," Blake said, and thumbed the timer, and the number began climbing without anyone in that crowd yet understanding what, exactly, it was measuring. He went over the log wall on the first count of 4, and it did not look like effort so much as arithmetic. Weight shifted, hand placed, leg swung. Weight shifted again, each motion landing on a beat only he could hear. 4 in through the wall, 6 out over the top. 2 recruits ahead of him on the course, boys with 2 years of conditioning and Blake's own morning recalibration behind them, had gone over that wall in a scramble of knees and elbows. Ezra went over it like a man closing a door behind him. By the rope traverse, the gap between him and the trailing recruit had already closed to nothing, and by the tire field he had passed him outright, not by speed exactly, but by refusal to spend a single motion he hadn't already decided to spend. He counted under his breath the whole way, 4 in, 6 out, the same cadence he'd handed Logan at the fence an hour earlier, except his own version of it had 30 years more practice worked into the rhythm, the counting less like effort and more like a man walking downstairs. He'd walked 10,000 times in the dark. At the second timing gate, the one Blake had shifted 4 inches that morning, Ezra's split came back faster than either certified recruit ahead of him, and Blake, watching the number populate on his phone, said nothing at all, which for a man who narrated his own competence as a matter of course was its own kind of confession. 2/3 through the 18th obstacles approach, past the low crawl, past the cargo net, Ezra came around the bend by the water crossing and found Logan Hackney down in the gravel, folded over his own knees, one hand fisted white-knuckled against his chest, breath coming in short, wet pulls that weren't finding enough air to matter. The inhaler had rolled 2 feet from his open hand, useless there, and his lips had gone the pale gray color that means a body deciding on its own authority that it has run out of good options. Ezra didn't check a watch he didn't have. He knelt, the same knee, out of long habit even here, put 2 fingers to Logan's wrist, counted, and said, "Low, not urgent. 4 in, hold it, 6 out, with me," and matched the boy breath for breath until the gray in his lips thinned by half a shade, which took longer to happen than it takes to say. Then Ezra stood him up, turned, and settled Logan's weight across his own back and shoulders in one continuous motion, the rucksack's old strap doing something it had clearly done before, some redistribution of load that let the strap carry the boy's weight instead of Ezra's spine carrying it raw. He did not run. He walked at a pace built entirely around the numbers 4 and 6, Logan's ragged breathing gradually finding the shape of Ezra's own, and the last stretch of that course. The stretch every recruit crossed in a sprint, arms pumping, chest wide open for the finish line cameras that weren't there. Ezra crossed at a walk, carrying a boy nearly his own weight, breathing louder than either of the certified recruits who'd finished 10 minutes before him. He crossed the flag at 11 minutes and 22 seconds. Blake stood at the timing shed with the number glowing on his phone, mouth open on a word he hadn't decided yet, and behind him, along the whole length of that fence, $60 in bet money sat forgotten in someone's closed fist because nobody standing there could remember, for several long seconds, what they'd been laughing at an hour ago. Blake looked at the number on his phone for a long 5 seconds, the kind of 5 seconds that in a courtroom would be called deliberation, and on a training range simply looked like a man trying to find a door out of a room that had rearranged itself while he wasn't watching. "I'm not certifying that," he said finally, and his voice had lost the pitch it carried at the gate. No audience left worth performing for, just the flat sound of a man protecting a position rather than making a point. "You're not on the roster. You're not insured personnel. That time doesn't exist as far as this course's records are concerned." "Fine by me," Ezra said, setting Logan down gently at the finish flag, checking the boy's color again with 2 fingers at the wrist before he said another word to anyone. "It's not fine," Blake said, and something in the way he said it suggested the trouble had already outgrown Ezra entirely. If word gets out an unenrolled 60-something civilian cleared this course carrying a recruit, every result this cohort's posted this month gets questioned. Everyone. I've got a contract review in 6 days built on this course's numbers being clean. "They are clean," Ezra said, "cleaner than they were an hour ago." Blake didn't answer that. He was already dialing, phone against his ear, pacing 3 tight steps one direction and 3 back, and the recruits at the fence, still working through what they just watched, went quiet again in the particular way of a crowd realizing the story isn't finished. The call that came back, 20 minutes later, was not the one Blake expected. It wasn't about Ezra at all, not directly. It was the range's insurance carrier, flagging a routine audit trigger buried in the paperwork Blake himself had filed weeks earlier while updating the course's liability history. Somewhere in the old digitized files, a name had surfaced that the carrier system had never seen cleared. An incident report, decades old, sealed, tied to this exact course under a different name, a different fence line, a different era of gear. The carrier wanted it produced before Friday's vote, or the whole permit went on administrative hold. Blake relayed none of the specifics to the recruits, only the shape of the trouble, which was enough. "There's a sealed file," he said, more to himself than to Ezra, staring at his phone. "Something from before my time here. They're saying it has to be open before the review, or the whole range gets suspended pending investigation." He looked up, and for the first time all morning, the look he gave Ezra wasn't dismissal. It was something closer to a question he didn't know how to ask yet. Logan Hackney, meanwhile, sat up against the finish flag's post, humiliation arriving late but arriving hard, the way it does for boys who've had a few minutes of relief to notice they've had an audience the whole time. "You carried me," he said, not as a thank you, but as an accusation leveled mostly at himself. "In front of everybody." "I did," Ezra said. "I was supposed to finish on my own. That was the whole point of the course." "You will," Ezra said. "Today wasn't that day." Logan stood, unsteady, waving off the hand Ezra offered without unkindness, just refusal. "I'm done," he said. "I'm pulling out. I'll tell the company I quit before they cut me for the collapse." He walked off toward the equipment racks without looking back, and Ezra let him go, watching the boys retreating back with the stillness of a man who has, more than once in his life, had to let someone walk away from help before they were ready to accept it. Behind him, the recruits at the fence had stopped talking about wagers entirely. The file, when the carrier's regional office finally produced it 2 days later under threat of the permit suspension, was thin, 4 pages, a training injury report from 39 years back, the ink gone the particular brown that only decades manage. The course's name on it different, but the terrain unmistakably the same ridge, the same water crossing, marked on an old survey map as a flash flood hazard that nobody had bothered updating in the intervening decades. The reporting party's signature at the bottom, faded but legible, read E. Tillman, Gunnery Sergeant. Blake read it twice standing at the timing shed, and the second time through his face did something the recruits hadn't seen it do yet, which was nothing at all. The practiced authority gone slack, replaced by a man doing arithmetic on a problem his spreadsheets had never been built to hold. Colton Rutherford arrived at Cutback Ridge on the Thursday before the vote, sent by the Reserve Advisory Office specifically to observe Blake's new time standard in action and put an official blessing on it before Friday's contract review. And he came the way rank generally comes to a place that's been expecting a title and gets a person instead, a battalion sergeant major, 58 years old, walking the fence line with the particular economy of a man whose knees have opinions about every step he takes. He stopped at the gate. He looked at the log wall, the water crossing, the flag by the timing shed, all of it registering on his face like a photograph developing. Then he saw Ezra standing near the equipment racks in the faded olive jacket, and Colton Rutherford did not salute, did not announce himself, did not perform any of the things rank is supposed to perform in front of an audience of recruits who'd gathered to watch him bless a stopwatch. He said one word, "Gunny." Nothing else for 3 full seconds, while Blake Vandergrift, mid-sentence in his own prepared remarks about certified time standards, simply stopped talking and never quite found the thread again. Ezra looked at him for a long moment, the way a man looks at a photograph he recognizes before he recognizes the person in it. "Rutherford," he said, "you made rank. You carried me across that same water 39 years ago," Colton said. To the recruits now, not to Ezra, his voice pitched for a room that had gone very quiet. "Flash flood came through mid-exercise. I was 19. Couldn't swim it with a full pack, went under twice, and Gunnery Sergeant Tillman went in after me and came out the other side with both of us breathing. There's a report on that. Somebody sealed it years back. Called it a training irregularity instead of what it was so it wouldn't cost the range its insurance rating." He turned to Blake. "You're building your whole new standard on top of a course that already almost killed somebody once and hit it. I'm not blessing that. I'm reopening it." Blake said nothing. His run sheet hung loose against his leg, forgotten, and for once in 6 days at that range, the numbers on it had nothing to say. Colton crossed the last of the distance between them and lowered himself down onto the bench by the equipment racks, hard, the particular unceremonious drop of a man whose knees have been billing him for 39 years, and finally sent the invoice due. He didn't apologize for it, didn't explain it, just sat and patted the bench beside him until Ezra sat too. "4 in," Colton said, quiet now, just between the two of them, though half the fence line could still hear it. "Hold it a beat. 6 out. Match the man ahead of you. Don't look at the water. Look at his shoulders." He recited it word perfect, the exact cadence Ezra had given a wheezing boy at a different fence line 4 days earlier, decades removed and unimproved because it hadn't needed improving. "You told me that going in," I've told it to every recruit I've trained since, and I never once told them where I learned it." Marissa Fairchild's name came into it plainly, without theater, when the carrier's regional counsel called that afternoon to confirm the file's provenance. 14 years prior, as a young administrator new to the contracting firm, she had reclassified the original injury as a training irregularity, non-reportable, a paperwork decision that protected a budget line and, as it happened, laid the groundwork for exactly the kind of clean numbers narrative Blake's new time standard would have made permanent, sealing an old wrong under a newer, harsher policy instead of ever correcting it. Blake absorbed that fact the way a man absorbs a diagnosis, standing very still, his printed run sheet still clipped to its foam board, useless now for the only question that mattered. "She told me the course's history was clean," he said, mostly to himself. "I built the whole new standard assuming it was clean. I never asked who'd decided that." "You asked good questions about gates and gear," Ezra said, not unkindly. The first time all week he'd offered Blake more than 3 words together. "You never asked who decided what counted as an accident." Colton, still seated, looked over at him. "You could burn her for this. Whole thing's documented now. Regional office, contract review, insurance carrier all asking the same questions on the same Friday. You'd win." "Don't want to burn anybody," Ezra said. "Want the report corrected. Want it to say what happened instead of what was convenient." He paused, glanced toward the equipment racks where, an hour earlier, Logan Hackney had disappeared without looking back. "And I want that boy allowed to finish this course on his own 2 feet, his own time, whenever he's ready for it. Nobody rushes him into it, and nobody counts him out for needing longer." Colton considered that, the way a man considers an order he intends to follow before he's finished hearing it. "That's all you want." "That's all I ever wanted," Ezra said, and something in the plainness of it closed the conversation the way a door closes when it was never meant to stay open in the first place. He never once asked Logan to go faster. He only asked him to keep breathing, and it turned out, months on, that asking had been the whole of the lesson. 4 months later, the course ran under a corrected policy that the regional office had adopted the same week as the vote. 1 line added in plain language. A completed crossing carried by another qualified person counts as a pass, timed from the point assistance begins, provided breath and consciousness are maintained throughout. Nobody at Cutback Ridge called it Ezra's rule out loud, but everyone who'd stood at that fence in the spring knew exactly whose name belonged on it. Logan Hackney ran the course alone on a cold Tuesday morning, 4 counts in, 6 counts out. The rhythm no longer something he had to remind himself of, but something his body simply did now. The way a man breathes who has stopped needing to think about breathing. Ezra stood at the timing shed without a stopwatch, same as always, watching the boy's shoulders instead of his split times, and when Logan cleared the final flag under the revised cutoff, on his own legs, no hand on his back and none needed, Ezra didn't cheer, didn't wave, just nodded once, the particular nod of a man confirming something he'd already known was true. Blake Vandergrift still worked the range, though his run sheet these days carried notes in the margins that had nothing to do with tenths of a second. He'd started asking recruits how they slept the night before a run, whether the cold bothered their chests, whether they'd eaten. Nobody had told him to. He'd simply stopped trusting a number that couldn't answer those questions and started asking them himself. Geneva Tillman kept her calendar the way she always had. Small pencil checks on the days that mattered, and on the evening Ezra came home from watching Logan's solo run. She didn't ask how it went, because 50 years of marriage had taught her that some good news announces itself in the way a man sets his boots by the door rather than in what he says about it. The old strap came off the rucksack for the last time on a Sunday afternoon at the kitchen table, and Ezra restitched it once more, a new row added at the end of all the others, small and tight and no different in appearance from the rest, except that this row was for a boy who hadn't given up when the whole fence line expected him to. He didn't say Logan's name while he sewed. He didn't need to. The thread already knew. At the gate now, past the timing shed, past the log wall with its still fresh paint, the strap hangs coiled on a peg where the fence meets the frame, and new recruits, without quite knowing why, have taken to touching it before they run, the way you touch a door frame on your way into a house that has always been a little more than a house. Some courses are not measured by the clock at all, and the ones who taught us that are usually the ones we walked right past.